Hello, low carbers. In this episode, we will have a topic close to my heart. As you may know, I am within neurosciences, and among the most common patients we see in the clinics as neurologists are those coming in with headaches, and many of them having headaches of the migraine type. And do you know how much carbohydrates you have in your diet indeed is a big factor in terms of whether or not you will have a migraine headache attack and how often you will have those migraines. Watch this episode with Dr. Angela Stanton and find out more, especially if you or perhaps any of your loved ones have migraine. Like this video, and don't forget to subscribe or follow the Low Carb Health Doctor channel, podcast, and other social media platforms. Great day, everyone. So today we have a very valuable guest, and we have with us the one who made the Stanton migraine protocol herself, Dr. Angela Stanton. So Dr. Stanton has a doctorate in neuroeconomics, and she has earned her functional MRI certification also from the Harvard University, the Athinoula Martinos Center for Biomedical Imaging. Interestingly, before that, she got her master's in management science and engineering from the Stanford University, as well as her MBA, the University of California at Riverside, and her BSc in Mathematics at the UCLA. She did her doctoral research to understand how changes in neurotransmitters influences human decision making. She herself is a migraine sufferer, and I suppose that's what actually led her to the study of migraines. She has published the first and second editions of her book, Fighting the Migraine Epidemic, which is a complete guide on how to treat and prevent migraines without medications. And currently, she teaches migraine sufferers and healthcare providers all over the world about how to abort and prevent migraines without any drug intervention. So with that, she is actually lecturing at the Nutrition Network, which is the metabolic health online education platform that was founded by the Noakes Foundation of Professor Tim Noakes. So welcome to the Low Carb Health Doctor podcast, Dr. Stanton.
Thank you for inviting me. What an honor. Thank you.
So, without further ado, we go to the meat of this matter. So, my audience are varied, mostly. Many of them are low carb enthusiasts as well as medical professionals. So, for the benefit of everyone, would you care to define exactly, Dr. Stanton, what is a migraine headache and how would you distinguish it from other forms of headaches?
Sure, I'm glad to. And that's a very important question because so many doctors aren't aware of the difference. So I need to start by saying that migraines don't have to have a headache to come with them. And so if you can have migraine without a headache, then clearly a headache may not tell us much about the migraine, because we may have a headache without the migraine and we may have a migraine without a headache. Approximately, it is understood that about 20% of migraines don't come with a headache. And so if the migraine comes with a headache, it must be something different from just a regular headache. So the definition of a migraine headache by the International Headache Society is not quite correct because of the overlap between standard migraines and other standard headaches and other kind of headaches from different causes. So let me elaborate on my findings, which is now based on over 15,000 migraine sufferers from around the world. And of course, all the literature that I could find my hands on. So a migraine itself is a condition in the brain that is caused by, and it's very complicated, but we can get into details, are caused by electrolyte imbalance. And so the headache that follows this particular condition is going to be very specific to one hemisphere. So we're looking at our head and we see the brain as one thing, but it's actually two distinct hemispheres, and they're not symmetrical. So if I have, for example, a migraine sufferer who can't speak all of a sudden, this may or may not have a headache come with it, but we know that it's going to be the left side of the brain area in the Broca area that is affected by the migraine, whatever it is. And so a headache associated with this is going to be always one-sided or unilateral, as it is defined, whereas a standard headache could be anything. So this is right away a distinguishing factor of what sides of the head the migraine is, or the migraine headache is on. The second distinguishing factor is, of course, where is it at and does it move? If you have a standard headache, a stress headache, or a sinus headache, like sinus headache would be in your sinus cavities and also the forehead. Stress headache may be the whole head. You may have occipital neuritis, which would be the top of the head. So you have different kind of headaches, but a migraine headache doesn't move. So if it starts, say, on the one side, on your left side, it's going to be staying on your left side. In addition, the Headache Society, International Headache Society, defines migraine as a pain that is over 4 hours. So if you have a headache that is less than 4 hours, by definition, can't be a migraine. And my experience is that most migraineurs have their migraines from 1 to 3 days. 3 days is quite average for a headache to last. And the last distinguishing factor is, of course, whether it's a pulsating headache or not. And there's a lot of confusion about this, because according to the American or the International Headache Society, a migraine is coming with a pulsing headache, but that is incorrect, because migraine is not a vascular headache. It's very specific to one particular brain region, so it is not a systemic vascular condition, so it's not going to be pulsating. Now, what happens is that after the second day of being in pain, the person will have stress hormones responding to that, and then it's going to become a pulsating headache as well, but that's not the original migraine. And so to distinguish the headache of a migraine and the headache of any other kind would be to look to see the location, the kind of headache, and whether it changes with position, for example. So is the headache going to get worse if I bend forward? For example, if I have sinus headache or stress headache, it's going to get worse. But if I have migraine headache, it's not going to change. So there will be significant differences between the headache types.
Yeah, I'm interested about that particular statement of yours, that a migraine does not necessarily have a headache. Would you mind expounding on that? Because for many patients, they really think that a migraine always comes with a headache.
Right. And so that is a very important, and unfortunately, it's a very frequent comment when people say, I have this terrible migraine because they have a headache, one that is really bad. But, and this is a little bit complicated, so I'm going to jump right in to sort of kind of explain. But when we're looking at a migraine, there is a whole lot of physiological changes that happening in the brain during the process of the preparation for the migraine, which is called the prodrome, and then the migraine itself. And so in the prodromal phase of the migraine, there is a state that is called CDS, a cortical spreading, CSD, a cortical spreading depression. And so literature discusses cortical spreading depressions associated only with aura migraines, but actually they're part of every single migraine. And so the aura phase is the one where a person may see or visualize the aura, which is an electrical activity through the brain. It's an ionic depolarization of the brain, meaning that sodium is entering in one place into the brain, and this sodium is sort of kind of handed down all the way through the brain. And so this wave, think of it like a giant wave in, say, the ocean, is heading through the brain in this one hemisphere from one point all through the brain, touching everything, every single nerve. It activates every single neuron to say, are you there? I'm here. Go on. Are you here? I'm here. Go on. And so it activates everything in order to reset the electrolytes in the brain. So every single neuron at every single area within the neuron is going to have electrolyte, the proper electrolyte amount. Now, if this cortical spreading depression was able to reset the electrolyte balance everywhere in the brain, then there won't be a pain associated with it. If it was unsuccessful and there is still that one area remains without an electrolyte balance, and therefore the brain is not able to activate an action potential, then we're going to start getting into the pain region. So depending upon how successful the cortical spreading depression was, and mind you, the cortical spreading depression is something that the brain itself does as an emergency situation. And it's basically very, very rare that within our brain or within our body, there's an organ that is able to sort of kind of rescue itself. And so that's basically what the brain is doing. And the brain is very capable of rescuing itself from many situations, including sugar crashes, with similar kind of facilitation with different chemicals and hormones. And so when the brain is sending this cortical spreading depression, now, because this was always associated with the people who actually saw this as the aura. So the aura is a visualization of the brain activating every single neuron. And so the beautiful colors, or sometimes it's just black and white, but the sparkling lines and or just sparkles in many cases, they represent the visualization of the nerve, each and every nerve being touched by this electricity that is moving through the brain. And in the case of the person who sees an aura, the angle of the wave is completely lined up with the natural vision of the eye. So it would be coming from the back, from the occipital cortex, and head forward. And so our occipital cortex is not able to distinguish whether the electrical stimulation to the cortex itself is coming from the outside of the eye or from within the brain. It's just an electrical stimulation. And so it is playing this electrical stimulation in front of the eye. And so the person who has an aura can close the eye, can still see the aura. So it's not on the outside, it's on the outside. It's inside of the brain, it's not on the out, it's not seeing, the person is not seeing it. And the person can close the eyes and can still see it. And so this is why, if for so long it was believed that this cortical spreading depression is only associated with those people who have aura. But now we know that a cortical spreading depression is associated with all migraines. It may simply not be heading exactly parallel with the visual cortex in such a way that it recognizes it as a signal. It may be perpendicular or maybe some angle. And so most migraineurs then won't see this particular spreading depression, but it doesn't mean it's not there. Only these migraineurs may or may not get a migraine. So they may not know that they have a prodrome going on because they don't see it. But a migraineur with an aura can see it and can even act on it. So if I have an aura, and if I'm familiar with my aura, and I know if I say drink some electrolyte by accident, I may have drank one electrolyte once and it became better. Then maybe I keep on drinking it and not realizing that I'm literally resolving the migraine. And therefore, my migraine doesn't appear and the pain is not going to come. And so I can interrupt a migraine in midstream by aborting it in natural means.
So what we have been taught as physicians is that migraines usually have stages. So like, let's say, for example, there's the prodrome and all that, which eventually propagates with that cortical spreading depression that you have mentioned earlier. So would that aura be part of the program? Would you help us understand more, especially our audience, how migraine actually propagates, how it starts, how it propagates, and how eventually it could become a full-blown attack of migraine that is the most prominent among not just doctors but patients?
Sure. Okay, so this is a little bit long. So the initiating force of the migraine is an electrolyte imbalance in the brain. And let me explain that, because once I explain that, then everything is going to be a little bit easier. So I don't know how much your audience is familiar with the brain and the neurons themselves, but you are a neurologist, so you're quite familiar with the neuron itself. And you know that the neuron has certain regions, the nodes of MBA, where the neurons are basically exposed, open, in that they don't have the myelin around them. And so every so many, I don't know what frequency of myelination. A myelin is the neuron itself is made of protein and a host of nutrients, but it's coated with myelin, which is a layer of wax and basically cholesterol and fat, saturated fatty acids and unsaturated fatty acid combination. And so, but in this myelin, there are little areas where it's not, the neuron is not covered. And where these areas are, there we have thousands or maybe millions of ionic channels. And so when an electrical signal is moving through the neuron, carrying the message from one neuron to the next neuron, at every single node of MBA, these thousands or millions of ionic channels getting to be activated, and they take sodium rushing into the cells through the voltage-gated ionic channels, activating an action potential in one spot. And in that one spot, the electricity is activated, and then it goes to the next node of RNVA. So this is what is referred to as a spike train. So the electricity is moving basically from node of RNVA to node of RNVA through moving from voltage-gated channel to voltage-gated channel, where at each place the sodium is running into the cell and activates the electricity. And then once the electricity is activated and moved on, the sodium leaves the cell and potassium enters the cell to create the resting potential. And then there'll be a refractory period. But this is moving through the neuron, and the speed with which it's moving through the neuron depends on the length of the neuron, the width of the neuron, the importance of the activity itself, whether the how much it was amplified, the signal was amplified at the time it entered the neuron. So it's going through the neuron all the way. Now imagine a neuron, which is, say, about that long, and that's quite possible. We can have neurons, we even have very long ones. And we have millions of these little openings where we would have the voltage-gated sodium channels. And just take one area where we don't have sodium. And so the voltage is heading to that area, and there sodium is supposed to run into the neuron, but there's no sodium there. Or maybe there is sodium, but the gates aren't opening for whatever reason. And so for whatever reason, the sodium is not able to activate the electricity at that spot. The whole neuron just stopped working because it can't pick up at a later spot. It has to start from the beginning and go all the way to the end. So if it stops, then there's no communication through that neuron to the next neuron. And this lack of communication is the start of the migraine, because the brain says, all right, we have one neuron that is not communicating, because the neurons that are connected to it know that this neuron is not communicating. It's not working the way it was supposed to. And since the connected neurons are not receiving messages, then they too can't pass that message on. And so they will signal to the nociceptors, the pain signals, that something is not right. And so the pain signals are going to then initiate the pain. But before the pain signal happens, there's going to be a period where the brain is discovering that this particular neuron is not working, and it's going to try to reactivate it. And this reactivation is the depolarization, where at one location, and I'm not actually know where that location is, and I don't know if anybody knows whether this location where the cortical spreading depression starts is always the same location, always a different location, or what the situation is. But in one particular area, the cortical spreading depression starts, which initiates. Basically, it's almost like this region of the brain is giving to this region of the brain sodium because it doesn't have enough. And so it passes on the sodium. And so the migraine itself, the prodrome phase, is this play in that the brain discovers that it's lacking sodium in one area and is trying to fix it. This itself is a prodrome. And so this prodrome can go on anywhere from just a minute to a couple of days. We have migraineurs who may have days, an entire evening, for example, where they feel that something is off. Very typical example, perhaps somebody being extremely full of energy. And we've had this many times that the person says, I was feeling so great. I cleaned the whole kitchen at 10 o'clock at night from tip to toe and washed everything, and bang, in the morning I came down with a migraine. And then we have to ask, well, is it normal for you to wash the entire kitchen tip to toe at 10 p.m. at night? And if it's not normal, then you can say, okay, so this was a prodrome period. And so the high energy came somewhere from the stress factor. So it could very well be because this person may have had the initiation of the prodrome, which is a fight or flight syndrome, earlier. And so when the brain is not working properly, it initiates a fight or flight. So part of the prodrome is the fight or flight. And so the fight or flight releases a lot of stress hormones, adrenaline, calcitonin, a whole lot of stress hormones are released, which then increases the heart rate, increases the blood pressure. It releases 20 times as much glycogen as normal. So a lot of glucose gets into the system. And so the brain basically prepares the body to run away from the lion or fight the lion, right? And so this is a standard normal activity. The brain doesn't know that the problem is inside the brain. It doesn't know it enough to control that, okay, I will only work in the brain, but it releases an entire stress for the whole body. And the stress is going to manifest in the fight or flight, which then sends a lot of sodium as well as glucose to the brain to energize it and to get it going. And that then starts the cortical spreading depression. So it's a lot of different physiological steps to this that initiate this. Now, part of the problem in the migraine brain of why this happens in a brain for a person with a migraine and not in a person without a migraine is because the brain is different between a migrainer and a non-migrainer. So migraineurs, I call it the original human brain. So if you go to an animal place, say a savanna or an animal park or zoo, and you look at wild animals, you can see that their sensory organs are extremely hyper. So they will have their ears moving continuously. They will be smelling the lion from 2-3 miles away. They will have much better hearing, much better smell, much better tasting. Some of them will see, like peripheral vision for us is extremely strong, and we see in the dark better than other people do. And so what appears to me is that rather than migraine being a neurological disease, it is the original hyperactive brain of what we used to have before we humans moved into our houses and cars and lights and television and computers. And so we retain the
You mean to say
hypersensitivity.
there's an evolutionary component to it.
Right. And I think that the migraineurs haven't adapted to the modern life. They retained the original brain, whereas 80% of the population has adapted and are reduced their ability to sense, whereas the migraineurs kept their original ability to sense. And so we can see this also in real life, because in the migraine group, we had many, many people who said they just reported that they smelled a gas leak, and nobody could smell the gas leak. And people were laughing at them that, no, we don't have a gas, nobody could smell. And they were forceful, and they called the gas department out, and the meter showed the gas leak. And so we have an extremely sensitive sensory organ or perception of what's happening around us. Like, for example, I don't have a good hearing, but if the noise is outside of the white noise, different, I will hear it, even if it is 20 miles away from me. Like there is a foghorn. I don't know where it's at. It's somewhere 20 miles away from me. And I will hear it over and above all the other noises, and nobody else hears it. And I don't have good hearing. I have worse hearing than the general population, but I hear different frequencies from other people as a result of my migraine brain. So I have a different ability. And because of this hypersensory organ, the migraine sensory neurons have more connections to each other. And the more connection requires more electrical communication, and that requires more salt. It's really this simple.
So this hypersensitivity is an innate, let's say, an innate characteristic for migraineurs.
Right. It is. And they call it a variant in the channel. So they basically genetically say it's a channelopathy because the voltage-gated calcium, the voltage-gated sodium, the voltage-gated potassium, and the voltage-gated sodium-potassium pump, the ATPase pump, are all variants. But I'm thinking that they're not the variants. That's the original. And all other humans are the variants who adapted.
Yeah, we're talking about channelopathy. So neurologists, we've come across that migraine is indeed, based on recent studies, is more likely a channelopathy or a problem with some ionic channels. And you mentioned something about sodium. Aside from sodium, and is there any other electrolyte probably that could be a major player in migraine? And if so, what would they be? And in terms also of this thing that you mentioned about the genetic component of migraine, how big of an impact is genetics actually among migraine sufferers?
Okay, so the first, the electrolyte. Basically, because we use more sodium and we have more communication, we also need more of the supporting electrolyte minerals that go with it. So we need more magnesium, we need more potassium, not much more potassium because we don't lose potassium like we do lose sodium. So potassium, we don't really need more, but we just need enough. And of course, calcium. Now, what happens is some studies have shown that migraineurs actually have more calcium in their brain and in their cells than typical. So we're not low in calcium. So it seems that the two key electrolyte minerals that we need to replenish quite a bit is the salt and the magnesium, these two. Now, the role of magnesium is basically to open these voltage-gated channels from the inside. Magnesium is used to attach the ATP, the actual energy that will open the voltage-gated channels. And so magnesium has a strong role. And given that we open our voltage-gated channels a lot more often as a result of the hypercommunications speed and type, so then we need more magnesium as well. So I find that these two, sodium and magnesium, are the biggest elements that we need to replenish much more than other people. And in terms of the genetics, there are many variants, and it's very difficult to really establish what's what for a couple of reasons. I'm not a geneticist, so I can't really speak too much of that. But what I do understand is that one may have a variant, but it doesn't mean it's expressed. So, for example, migraineurs are said to have a lot more problems with the B vitamins. And so they say that they have a variant in the MTHFR, which is a group of B vitamins, the folate B9 and the cobalamin B12. And so they all want to supplement B9 and B12. But the problem is that in order, just because one has the variant showing up, particularly when we're talking about SNPs, which is the SMP kind of genetic measurements, if somebody shows that they have a heterozygous, meaning they inherited one of two variants from a parent, or a homozygous, where they inherited both variants from each parent, it may be there, but it may not be expressed. And so what may be required is, number one, that these have to be expressed. And in order for the genetic variant to be expressed, there are a lot of things that have to happen. So first of all, other genetic variants upstream before coming down to these genetic variants, they all also have to be expressed in different ways such that this end variant is going to be affected. So it may not be affected, even if it appears to be like homozygous, that you have inherited something from both parents. It still may not mean that you have expressed it. By contrast, you may not have it show at all that you have this variant, yet you still have expressed it because the upstream variants that nobody's checking may have expressed, forcing an expression on this as well. Plus, environmental variables, which is the epigenetic. So for example, if you put me, a migraine sufferer, on an island where I'm alone and all I can eat is animal products, no plants whatsoever, just animal products and plenty of salt, I am not a migrainer. I will never know that I am a migrainer. So it has to be in a very particular environment where it presents itself that I am a migrainer. And so genetics is quite a bit misleading because you believe you may have it and then you may not have it at all. For example, in my case, back to the B variants, the MTHFR, there's a B9 and B12. So in my case, my B12 is activated. And so, for example, when I was 19, I needed to have an intravenous solution. I never understood it. At that time, I didn't understand it. Now I am 70. And I went to test again to see my genetics. And yes, indeed, I have the B12 expressed as a problem. But guess which vitamin I actually need to take? It's the B9. I don't need to take the B12. And the B9 for me is not even showing up as expressed. So what happened there? Well, something upstream expressed somewhere. And it's not important to find it. It's not important to look at it, because once I know that I am low, and if I take it, I improve, then I know it's expressed. I just don't know about it. I can't find it genetically. So genetics can be really misleading.
So that does not mean that if you do not have the genetic predisposition to have migraines, then you wouldn't have a migraine then.
No, you wouldn't, unless you get some traumatic brain injury, which can express it coincidentally. So it can modify some upstream elements. And even though you didn't have a migraine brain to start with, you didn't have the genetics for it, you may still express it later as a result of that injury. So you can have an additive effect in that some injury can bring about some other changes in the brain.
Thank you very much for those explanations, Dr. Stanton.
Watch part 2 of this podcast episode, and you shall learn more about real-world practical interventions towards averting or controlling migraine headache attacks without using medicines. See you in that video here, or click the link in the video description below.